For a game series to be consistently relevant, it's often necessary for the developers to innovate the inherent systems and associated stories to maintain the current customer base and appeal to a wider audience. But it's not easy to keep everyone happy with such changes. Inevitably, someone is going to be disappointed. That's the price a company must pay if they want their games to remain at the forefront of the market. What happens then if the changes are not great? Let's examine that today in my review of Ark the Lad End of Darkness by Cattle Call, released for the Sony PlayStation 2 in Japan in 2004 and North America in 2005. Set 5 years after the events of Ark the Lad Twilight of the Spirits, End of Darkness puts us in the shoes of a boy named Edda who lives on Cray Island. If you remember, this island is where it was first discovered that humans and Deimos could live together harmoniously. Edda passes his days playing with his friend, a Slothian named Hemo. Together, they have been devising a way to leave their small island in hopes of seeing the larger world. Edda is an orphan who washed up on Cray Island when he was a youngster. Since then, the inhabitants of the island have acted like a family, raising him together. One day, when building a raft that will carry them to the outside world, a large airship passes by overhead, heralding visitors from a foreign land. Edda laments that he can't share this experience with Hemo because the Slothian hasn't turned up, when suddenly he arrives bearing a book with gold embellishment. Claiming that he found it in the forest, Hemo asks Edda to read it. Edda cannot make out any of the text except for an excerpt that rings clear in his mind. Before he can digest where he's seen the writing before, a girl arrives demanding the book back. Edda returns it, and the girl leaves without even as much as a thank you. Later, Edda learns that the airship that arrived bore hunters, a type of mercenary that take on various guild jobs to uphold the world peace brought on by the heroes from the previous game. When Edda first meets the hunters, he notices that they are wearing a strange bracelet called an ALD. This device allows those who wear one to cast magic via the red focusing lens embedded at its core. Edda is called to see the Elder, who requests that he accompany the hunters to the Cave of Truth, as he is the only one that can escape a Dharmist, a type of monster that is perceived to be invincible by the island inhabitants. The hunters decline Edda's assistance and set off for the forest. The Elder then gifts Edda with a staff that belonged to his father and implores the boy to follow the hunters to keep them safe. Let's just stop the summary here for a quick second, as I would like to point out the tapestry behind the Elder. For those with a keen eye, you'll notice that it depicts Karg, Dark, and Samson's visit to the island 5 years ago. I liked this a lot, though references to the previous game like this are very few and far between, and I don't understand why this is. Arriving at the cave, Edda and Hemo find that they are too late. Within the depths they encounter the girl from before, Kirika, who is kneeling over the dead body of a man who refused Edda's company. Before they can question her, she runs off and the Dharmist arrives. Edda defeats it, exorcising its presence from the plane of existence, and then has an awkward look on his face, as though he's just come to sexual realization. As another aside, what was wrong with him is never explained later in the game. The game then skips to Edda waking up in Milmana, after having supposedly been capsized at sea, but Edda doesn't remember any of this. This is just the start of some of the problems that this game presents to the player. After running around Milmana and talking to some of the citizens, Edda is permitted to attempt a mission for the Hunters Guild so that he can prove that he has what it takes to join their ranks. Successfully completing this task, he is permitted to travel all over the world to the various guilds to take on missions from them. This system resembles how the story in Ark the Lad 3 was presented, however this time it's much more restrictive, and the guild missions aren't all unique and interesting. One thing that I would like to point out in particular is the fact that the overall story seems very half-baked. There are some good ideas and concepts on how the world would exist with Deimos and humans living together with the depleting resource of spirit stones, however their alliances and conflicts are never really explored in detail. Additionally, the antagonistic group Truth Sword is a terrorist organisation that wishes to destroy all living beings that refuse to live harmoniously with nature, being that the destruction of the world was caused by these races. This theme is also not heavily explored either. The game overall felt a little rushed and had little depth to any of the characters. This was a great disappointment to me, especially considering how much I enjoyed the previous game. Whilst there were opportunities to see how some of the heroes were now getting on 5 years later, not all of them appear. I was especially surprised that both Karg and Dark, who featured heavily in Twilight of the Spirits, had no role to play this time around. The game almost wholly revolves around the participation in Hunters Guild's quests, though they are split into two types, board tasks and counter tasks. Board tasks tend to be longer and move the narrative of the story forward, whereas counter tasks are minor fetch quests, or those involving killing certain enemies. The purpose of these is to do enough to gain merit that will allow Edda to take a hunter exam and rank up in Rulun. You need 10 of both board tasks and counter task merits to do this. Board tasks always grant 5 points when completed, whereas points derived from counter tasks are determined by the rank difficulty of the task selected. You cannot take on both counter and board tasks at the same time, and if you decide to discard any of your counter tasks, they will deduct the number of points that the task would have rewarded from your total, so be careful to select tasks that you know you will definitely be able to complete. To take on the many quests the game offers, you will need to outfit Edda with equipment and abilities which come in the form of cards. The system of having everything relegated to cards puts to mind Butt and Katos, but this game is far from the grand adventure that game presents. You can equip up to 3 equipment cards and 4 ability cards. I must note that if you fail a counter task, whether it be by not completing the objective or by dying, you will have all of your ability cards confiscated and they will never be returned to you. My advice, if you want to dare play this game, is not to use your best cards on these missions. To mitigate this risk, you can find character cards and manifest them at a shop. A manifested character card can also have the same amount of equipment as Edda, and they all control differently in battle, so it is fun to kind of play around with them a bit. The characters featured appeared in previous titles, which was a nice touch, especially seeing how some of the 2D models transitioned into 3D. The manifested characters will also lose their ability cards if they fail a mission, but at least it's not as traumatic as, say, when I lost Edda's unique Lancer Spirit card and did not have it for the rest of the game. Oh, also Edda is the only one who can be deployed to the field for board tasks, though failing those thankfully doesn't have any consequences. Cards can be obtained from the various stores around the world, as well as dropped by different enemies in the combat areas, though the Lottery House in Deals World is the only way to obtain some of the character cards, costing an expensive rare resource to even attempt. To make stronger cards, some stores also offer a synthesis service where you can combine cards to make stronger ones. Most of this is through experimentation, though there is a Mothly that can be found in one of the holes that Hemo can enter that will give you some recipes. Luckily, failed synthesis attempts only waste your time rather than costing you the cards, like how the Star Ocean games take your materials. I would recommend looking up a synthesis guide in order to find some of the best recipes, as without it, I would have been stuck with basic cards for the entire game, especially after I lost Lancer's Spirit. The majority of the game is action related, where combat plays out over various fields, caverns, and dungeons. Gone are the days of turn-based strategy, replaced with janky field combat. As you run through the various areas, you will encounter enemies along the way. Edda can engage them using his staff with a 4-hit combo. The final strike of the combo always does the most damage, and will almost always knock the opponent down. However, if Edda is interrupted, or you stop the combo to dodge an enemy's attack, you must start the combo all over again. What I found frustrating was that there was no way to cancel out of a swing. Once you press the attack button, you are committed to the animation until it completes, so if you want to avoid an enemy's attack, you need to have enough foresight to know when to abort a combo before Edda is struck. If you use the L2 button to lock onto the enemy, you can then use R1 and L1 to strafe around them. Though if you're engaged with multiple opponents at once, you may find yourself in a pickle. Additionally, each time an enemy is knocked down, they have a recovery period where they are invincible and cannot be damaged, which I felt was too long and dragged out all the encounters far longer than they needed to be. In addition to normal enemies, you will sometimes encounter malademons, which are enemies encased in a black mist. These enemies do a lot more damage than their normal counterparts and cannot be killed unless you hold the circle button to perform Edda's exorcism move when they have no health. The problem with this is that if another enemy strikes Edda when he is performing this move, it cancels the animation and you need to restart it. Malademons with 0 health are only stunned for a short amount of time, and if you don't exorcise them, they will restore some of their health, meaning you will have to whittle it down again. This is particularly aggravating as it occurs in some of the boss fights too, which made them very unfair, especially if you accidentally struck them instead of exorcising them, or another enemy struck you. Your 4 ability cards are mapped to cross, square, triangle and circle respectively and can be cast by holding down R2 and then pressing the assigned button. All magic costs MP, which is displayed as 2 bars on the bottom of the screen. The green bar represents the amount of MP you have currently available to use. As you use magic, it will deplete and then start slowly filling from the blue bar. You can speed up how quickly this fills by holding triangle, but I never found myself in a situation where I needed to do this. The total amount of blue MP bars that a character has is dependent upon the hunter rank. Edda's ranks can only be raised at the exam center in Rulun, whereas the character cards can have their rank raised with SP, which is gained by Edda from exorcising malademons. When I started up the game and watched the introduction cinematic, I was excited to see what the characters from the previous game were doing. Sadly, most of them don't factor into this story at all, and those that do are only featured rarely. Whilst I enjoyed revisiting the old locations, there were few changes, and it was mostly a lot of reused assets. When it came to the dungeons, the screens all looked very similar, so navigation was a pain in the ass, and as time passed, I became more and more disinterested with the game, hoping it would come to a close sooner rather than later. It is a shame because the Ark the Lad series has become one of my favourite game series in the past couple of years. For it to end like this, what was Cattle Call thinking? One nice thing I will say about it though, is the way in which some of the events were presented. Sometimes the characters will talk on the field, and others there will be an enlarged version of their character model displayed on the screen. I liked that this took us a little closer into the narrative, as though we were in on the conversation. Sadly though, apart from this, there wasn't really anything to write home about in terms of the graphics. Unfortunately, the music also wasn't very noteworthy, what with many of the tracks being recycled from Twilight of the Spirits. There are a few unique tracks, but they come up so few and far between that they are almost barely noticeable. I tended to be more excited when I heard familiar tracks that I enjoyed from the previous title. The other glaring mistake in this game is that despite the previous one featuring voice acting and cutscenes, this game has none. The only time you will hear the characters speak is when they are yelling their battle call for the 100th time. There isn't even any variety to those either, so you'll start to feel like you have an earwig in your ear, permanently repeating the same battle shouts for all of eternity.
Want this? Want this?
Sadly, Ark the Lad End of Darkness isn't a great game and you should probably avoid it, especially if you're a fan of the series. Whilst Cattle Call appears to have attempted to be innovative, there isn't really anything redeeming about the game, and it felt to me like it was just a cash grab made by the studio because they were a bit rough on cash at the time. With too many reused assets and music, and a half-baked plot, I would recommend that you stay away from this title if you know what's good for you. Sadly, it was with this title that the Ark the Lad series was laid to rest. That was, until the mobile title Ark the Lad R was released in Japan in 2018, with news that it would be getting localized recently in 2020. Whether or not I'll check this out remains to be seen though. We'll see. By the way, if you've happened to play Ark the Lad R, let me know whether it's worth my time in the comments. I'd love to hear about your experiences with it. This has been Venwa bringing you a review of Ark the Lad End of Darkness for the Sony PlayStation 2. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe, as it helps me out a bunch. Thanks again, I hope you've been well, take care of yourselves, and see you next time. Bye bye for now.